Thanks for joining. Excited to have you here. Special shout out again to folks that I met at NS Spain, folks that met our team at DroidCon New York. We are running a bit of a sort of tailored or special webinar today, focused on some of the cool new stuff we've shipped. And then depending how far we get with that, we'll also cover also some of the basics and recap stuff for folks who are less familiar. Explain a bit about how different teams are kind of leveraging some of these features. Agenda will be quick overview, dive right into the new stuff one by one, and going to leave time for questions at the end, but please do feel free to drop questions in the chat along the way as well. I'll try to keep an eye over there and answer as we go. So no need to save questions at the end, but we'll set aside some time. Quick intro, who I am. I'm one of the founders of Runway and a former iOS engineer for really my whole career until starting Runway. So I've lived the mobile experience. It's true of a lot of our team. And so it's very much kind of in our blood, building for mobile, trying to make teams' lives easier, help them ship higher quality apps more easily. So yeah, and if you're here, chances are this webinar is for you, but just to kind of paint that picture, we work with a whole range of different kinds of teams, sizes of teams, and different kinds of folks on those teams. So of course it's, engineering heavy a lot of the time, but we have product folks, QA, other stakeholders, CX and ops that are using Runway that we're working with. So really this is sort of cutting across the whole mobile org at different kinds of teams. Cool. Let's get right to it with a very quick kind of motivating outline of kind of what we're going to look at. Some of you may or may not be familiar. Runway is a mobile release management platform. And we're focused on two kind of really big themes. One, kind of easier to maybe grasp and think about, is automation. We want to allow teams to very easily, without maintenance work, without sort of constant flakiness and vigilance, we want to allow you to automate end-to-end the entire release and some of the dev kind of life cycle too. And so that extends far beyond just your build pipeline. It starts with kind of your Git branching, tagging, cherry picking, back merging, a lot of that sort of stuff with sort of Git wrangling, to project management and how you sort of label work and automating that, all the way through to sort of helping you manage your build pipeline, and then through, of course, to the stores and rollout as well. So really enabling this sort of broad end-to-end automation with kind of high quality out of the box automation. One big theme. And actually some of the new features we're going to look at, there's quite a few new automations that we'll be taking a look at. The other big theme, just to keep in mind as we go through, is this sort of single source of truth collaboration aspect. We really want to create this unified dashboard and this sort of meeting place for the mobile org. So throughout your releases and dev lifecycle, the team should have one place to go to understand where everything stands, how the team is doing, what you're shipping, quality, how our rollout's going, all these bits and pieces. That tends to be, maybe noise back and forth, same questions being asked over and over in Slack, or maybe you have some kind of tracking docs and spreadsheets, sync meetings. So really trying to create a real source of truth for teams. So those are the two big themes. And to get into our first new feature that we're going to highlight here, we're going to dive right into sort of a pretty popular automation that's already been available in Runway. And it has two kind of pieces to it. This is our sort of release scheduling and automated submission and release feature, which teams can enable if you want to sort of move towards a more recurring, regular, predictable release train. So maybe weekly or bi-weekly releases, just make a really formal kind of release cut, but then also even once all the pieces are in place, you've sort of signed off on a build, regression testing passed, even automating your kind of submission date and also release date. So we're going to jump right into it over here. There's two pieces to this sort of release cadence automation. First is the schedule. And so this is something that you can set up entirely independent of automations. We have a lot of teams that kind of get started in a more manual way, and they just want this framework with the reminders going out and kind of the expectation setting around the team about these target dates, so everybody can kind of be working towards the same goal and have a clear picture of the expected timeline. So pretty straightforward here. In Runway, you can set up your desired release cadence with a particular frequency. So weekly, bi-weekly, pretty common these days. You can set up any one or all of these sort of 3 target days. So key points in the release cycle: kickoff, submission, and release. You don't have to set them all up, so you can just do certain ones. And you'll have timing, of course, alongside the day of the week and time zone there. So setting up kind of your release train and the schedule. This is the first part. If you just stop there, Runway is going to automatically apply the schedule to your different releases. And it just kind of rolls from there, and you'll get reminders. The team's going to see in Runway, but also out in Slack, for example. You'll see these upcoming dates and reminders and deadlines. And of course, you can ship these on one-off basis if you need to. So that's the first piece. Now, layering on the automation, we'll hop into some automation settings here. And you can turn on various automated actions that will tie to each of those kind of lifecycle timings along the way. So kickoff, there's a kickoff automation. There is a submit automation here, and there's a release automation, which releases here, but it's somewhere in there. So basically you can enable, for each of these lifecycle timings, you can enable Runway to kind of automatically carry out that action. And so this feature has been around for a while, actually. There is something that we've added to the submission and the release automation specifically, which was a big feature request from teams. Basically what happens is they have this target date, maybe for submission, that they're aspiring to, right? You want to get your cycle done. QA should be all good. You have the necessary sign-offs, and you're good to go. And then Runway will just submit. But sometimes things are a bit slower than planned, or there are kind of show-stopping regressions or bugs. Those issues during a cycle get surfaced clearly in Runway, and they become kind of gates that will prevent the automated actions from proceeding. So you'll see in a visual way, if you haven't already, what that looks like in a release in Runway. We'll take a look. But basically, the important thing to know is like there are these safeguards where Runway is not going to proceed with automation if things are not in good shape. And so teams were wondering, in a certain release cycle, if we've missed our target date for submission because maybe QA took a bit longer than expected. That's okay. We didn't make the original date. We would like for the submission to still be automated once we do get those final checks in. So QA has come into Runway, or they through a Slack action, they finally sign off on the build. All these gates are now green. Runway can then proceed and automatically submit. And so this is the new feature here. There are options now for how submission and release can operate. So on the target date, this is the original option here. You either are good to go, Runway proceeds on the date. If it misses it, it's going to alert your team, show it in the UI, but nothing else happens. Then you proceed manually. But now there are a couple options here. So you can change to kind of that mode I was just talking about, where you had a target date, you missed it, the team is still working away, they're getting the last few pieces in place, and when those last pieces are good, you're gonna proceed. So you can enable that as soon as steps are ready, no earlier than your target date. So basically, once stuff is good to go, Runway will submit the version. And you can also do a lighter weight version, which is kind of like whenever all these steps and checks that you've designed in the process are good to go, then Runway will ship the app or submit it in this case. So a couple options there. They give you this nice mix of kind of automation, of course, but with the kind of safety blanket and with this accommodation for things not always going to schedule, which is pretty common. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. And yeah, similar idea for the release, the auto release automation. So you can set it up with similar config if you want, or a different one. So that is our first new feature, and I see there's a question here. Syncing automations across apps. Yeah, so this is something that we can probably often rig up for teams kind of on the back end here. But what we typically see teams doing for this is actually creating special gates in one app or the other to have this effect. So, for example, you would create a checklist item or an approval item on the Android side that corresponds to kind of this sign off of like iOS was accepted for this version. And then basically by flipping that, that's sort of like creating that relationship. And then the other side, the Android side, can proceed, because often it varies by team actually these days, but often Android could be quicker than iOS review wise. So there's ways to set that up for sure. Happy to help talk through that. Yeah. Cool. Next new feature to highlight is also kind of in the automation domain here. And so we're going to look at it on the iOS side, but I should note that let's hop over to Android. As a lot of you probably already know, the idea is like kind of parity between the two platforms. We usually demo on iOS. It's just sort of fully set up. But parity, some specific automations where the two platforms differ. So here for this one, I'm going to hop over to Android just because there's kind of the extra special bit here. Customizable stage rollouts. Part of this has been available for a while. So as you Android folks will know, you don't have like a fixed rollout schedule like on iOS, where it's just like if you want to do a phased rollout, 7 days, they have their percentages. That's all you can do. On Android, you have your choice. You can customize your rollout, but to do that, you need to go to Play Console every day and update a number in a text box, basically, which is a waste of time and annoying each and every release. So first part of this automation, which has been around for a little while, is just the ability to automate your stage rollout on Android. And so you can see that in the top area of the modal here. Set up number of days that you want your rollout to run for. You can set granular percentages for the whole schedule. So however you want the rollout to proceed, and Runway will run your rollout for you, no problem. So that's the kind of first part. The second part, and this part is available on both iOS and Android, is the ability to specify blackout days for your rollout. So use case here is that for some teams, depending how you want to run your on-call and like team culture, that kind of stuff, also user base, kind of how many folks are in there, it could be that you'd prefer not to increment your rollout during weekends or outside of business hours. Because especially for the initial big jumps, maybe like day 1 to day 2, if that's a big percentage jump, that's often when a lot of crashes and issues will tend to surface when you do kind of go up a big step change in usage. So we were hearing from teams that they manually pause their rollout sometimes, or on Android, they weren't advancing a rollout during weekends or outside of business hours, just to save the extra kind of on-call load that creates. So here you can automatically achieve that on both Android and iOS. So basically pausing your rollout if you're within time ranges that you define. So for example, the kind of common use case might be, let's pause our rollout on weekends, and then maybe Monday morning early. I don't know what it would be like. Whatever it is, you might do like out of office hours on all weekdays. So like 9 to 5 or 10 to 6, however you all work. Or maybe just like on the ends, Monday, Friday with the weekends. You can set days, you can set specific time ranges. And basically once this is set, Runway is going to make sure that your rollout is not advancing during those times. And on the iOS side, of course, because here you would have Runway kind of controlling the whole rollout for you. On the iOS side, we will make sure it's paused and does not continue until you're outside of these blackout times. So again, can be really nice for kind of saving some some load on call for the team, and run a bit of a more customized rollout. So blackout days on rollouts, and we have some love for the Android phase release. Appreciate that. Always good to hear. Cool. Next up is another favorite. I'm gonna hop over here. So one of the kind of categories of automations that teams are really liking is around kind of the stuff, like all the stuff that needs to happen even before you're cutting your first release candidate or cutting your first builds. There's a lot of just kind of bookkeeping and wrangling that happens with Git, not just for like cutting a branch and bumping your version, but there's some recurring stuff that happens as you're preparing a release, when you need to sort of get fixes in, or deal with any late arriving work. So there's this continuous process, right, of either cherry picking work over. If you cut your release branch, you can see that automation here. This one is a favorite for sure, been around for a while. There's this other mode, right, of like applying fixes first to your release branch, and then either at the end of the release cycle, or some teams actually were doing this continuously and manually. Every time you push a fix to the release branch, back merge that into develop, so that develop is on the latest as well and has the fix. So that's annoying. It's a lot of recurring manual work that someone, often multiple people, are having to do every time you need to get a fix in. You will either cherry pick or back merge. Of course, part of the reason why some teams that choose to do this back merge flow, they do it just once at the end of the cycle, and then they have to deal likely with like more conflicts and more annoyance, is just because it's too much work and it's annoying to back merge continuously. So some teams do that because it's nicer to avoid that last sort of final back merge that also sometimes gets forgotten in the end, and that creates messes. But yeah, it's also a lot of work to keep doing that. So we automate back merges, and what Runway used to do with this automation was back merge at the end of your release cycle, because that's sort of the more common approach. But we added the option now to back merge continuously. So that second radio button down there, pretty self-explanatory. Runway is going to be, watching your release branch, and post-release cut, when you have new work, fixes, or changes that land on the release branch, we will automatically take those and get them back merged over to develop. And so you can run that continuously. You'll get that sort of updated diff or updated code onto develop, and you don't have to do anything manual. And with both of these, of course, you're not going to forget to do the back merges period, which is that sort of extra annoying failure mode. So yeah, extra option on the back merge automation. Cool. Next up, we're going to look at our build uploads. So traditionally, not even traditionally, still, Runway, sits apart from CI/CD. We're not CI/CD. We integrate with your build pipeline, and we take care of all of the before, some of the during, kind of managing pipelines and builds, and then all the after. But occasionally we do decide to overlap a little bit to take some work off of teams' plates when it comes to setting up scripting and stuff that they might put into CI, saving teams from, if they don't feel like building stuff in Ruby and maintaining it, for example, saving teams from a bit of the Fastlane scripting you have to do. We love Fastlane, but it can be actually a bit of a drain to maintain. So we've picked and chosen some sort of parts of, I guess, of the build pipeline to kind of help out with. And this is a big one that's actually kind of taken off. The ability for Runway to handle the upload step. So kind of towards the end of your build pipelines, you have an artifact. We can help you get that to the places it needs to go, which could be a few different places, of course, depending where in the cycle you are and where you're distributing. So a couple advantages maybe of using this, of course, like I said, just a bit less scripting you need to build and maintain. But also we can, depending how you've implemented your upload, we can be saving you a bit of build time, build minutes. So you don't have to pay for this time of like uploading. And also build uploads can be a little flaky, and it can be annoying to have to go into CI, go into a particular job or step, rerun it, or maybe rerun the whole job just to get an upload fixed. And so with this, Runway has automatic retries that happen. You can come into Runway and manually retry, but we also kind of automatically retry, and we'll send you status notifications about it too. So that can save a bit of wasted time and flakiness as well. So yeah, does what it says on the box. We are already integrating with CI, of course, and we already can do some stuff with artifacts, surfacing them, install links, that kind of thing. So you can flip on this automation and have us take those artifacts, specific artifacts of your choosing, and send them where they need to go. And so there's just some config to set up how we're going to do that. There's some options for how Runway is going to handle failures and uploads to make sure you kind of have the ordering correct. If you have like earlier builds that fail and you try to upload over it and then retry the other one with build number, requirements, it can get hairy. So there's some options for trying to help manage that stuff. And you attach some rules, and this is going to define how Runway is grabbing artifacts and where we send them. So you're going to specify a workflow. This ties back to your CI/CD integration and those settings in Runway. So you'll see different jobs available here. You will specify a file name or a pattern here. So Runway just needs to know, obviously, like which artifact, what kind to be taking. In some cases, let's say, teams have, on the Android side, you might be building multiple APKs with a given run. Even on iOS, if you do like white labeling or something like that, you might also be creating multiple artifacts. So yeah, different ways to define exactly what artifact Runway is going to care about. And then a destination. And so this ties back to some other Runway integrations you likely already have hooked up. Your pre-production distribution, which might be test flight, it might be Firebase app distribution, and then a production destination, which is sort of App Store Connect or Play Console. So you can set a destination for where these artifacts for this workflow should go. And yeah, Runway will take care of the rest. Watch these builds, grab these artifacts, send them where they need to go, and you should be up and running. Cool. All right. Next up, rollouts. Rollouts is a big favorite of ours, and I'm going to just go right into the product to kind of show it first. So that whole part of the process after you've released, Runway is not just about the before. We know that your job is not done once you've shipped a version. You want to keep close tabs on it. You want to monitor health. You want to act maybe on what is happening health-wise. You might need to ship a hotfix. So that whole part of the flow is quite important to us. So you can see a bit of it here on the sort of app home view, this live release. A little bit crazy because for our demo, we plug a lot of integrations and metrics into here, but high level sort of picture of how all these signals of health that are important to your team, how they're tracking for the given release. And everything you see here, the cards, this is customized by your team, right? So you're kind of telling Runway, these are the things we care about. The metrics that you see with colors on the side, that's a sort of threshold that you've defined. So you set some boundaries, and Runway will give you this like at a glance view. So you can see like we're all green, things are good, or maybe there's like a red area that needs attention. So yeah, this is rollouts, and then the detail view here, just to give the full context. Every release is going to have a dedicated space for this. Again, with the cards, you're going to see adoption relative to other versions, and then detail as you roll out. So these are updated live. This is like a live dashboard, and you're going to see how everything is faring as you roll out, also relative to thresholds if you've set any, like that guy. Some really wild numbers in here. This is a real app, by the way. It's a side project of mine. So this is real users doing real stuff. But yeah, so you can watch this sort of as you roll out, and reviews as well will get pulled in here. So yeah, this is rollouts. There are a couple big new changes here that I can kind of point out on this screen, and then we'll kind of take a look in the settings as well. One big new change is actually just the fact that you see all these different cards here. So it used to be the case that you could integrate for rollouts. You would integrate your crash reporting tool, and then you could integrate a sort of observability analytics tool. And previously, you could integrate just one of those tools at a time. So you could hook up, Sentry for crash reporting. You hook up Amplitude for sort of the observability analytics. Teams are very often measuring stuff in more than just these two tools, especially on the observability analytics side. You could have, Amplitude for the product analytics stuff, and then you're also measuring maybe performance and some other behavior stuff in a Datadog or something like that. So first big change here is allowing multiple integrations for the observability analytics integration point in Runway. So here you can see we actually have Datadog hooked up for crash reporting. We also have Datadog hooked up for some performance sort of behavior event stuff. We also have Amplitude hooked up here. We have GA hooked up, not receiving data from it. And what else? Yeah, so like a few different pieces plugged in here. We want you to be able to pull in all these different signals from the different tools you're using and make sure they're in one place. So that's the first big change, multiple integrations. The other big change is some of the cards you can see here have some values like this. So they have like percentiles. You have some average value, median value cards as well. These are all new metric types that you can decide to surface here. So before, we were kind of doing the classic per session, per daily active user stats, like you can see here. But depending on the metric, you're going to want to measure different stuff on it. So you can see this add item action. We have a sense for like how often that's happening per session. But we also want to track the amount. So when people are kind of executing the add item action, how much, in this case, it's an item you order at a restaurant. How much does it cost? So you can get averages there. You can get percentiles as well. And you can imagine if you're, an e-commerce app or something, this is going to be maybe looking at your average cart size or average add to bag value. And you can do a lot with different user flows and funnels and, these key metrics you want to keep tabs on. So yeah, second thing, new metric types, percentiles, averages, medians, and I think there's more to come here as well on the roadmap. Very quickly on this, just to complete the picture, the integrations you can see here. So here under observability analytics, you can see we have a few different ones hooked up at once. And then here you can see there's sort of specific events defined. So you'll kind of select events that you want to be considered. And then from there, you can attach these health metrics. So this is where your team is kind of defining your expectations, your thresholds around these values across all the tools. So you can see we have a bunch kind of defined down here. This is kind of what it would look like if you add in some more. And you have your choice of the specific metric that you want to track or you want to attach to a threshold that's going to be kind of measured and alerted on, and also even tied into rollout automations. So this is not in scope for highlighting today, but all of this is kind of visual, like give you a single dashboard for health, but you can attach automations to all of this. And so I don't know if we have it enabled on here. Yeah, but you'll be able to automatically stop rollouts if any of these thresholds you've configured get unhealthy. And you can even accelerate rollouts if stuff is healthy. So we see a lot of teams doing that to kind of, on the iOS side, because you don't have control, they want to speed up the rollout a bit. So they do 3 days maybe staged. And if they get to the third day and everything is looking good and healthy, they'll accelerate to 100. Runway can kind of automate that whole process. So that can be pretty cool and kind of safeguard health as well. Awesome. So that was rollouts, some updates to rollouts. What happens next? So you're on rollouts, you're monitoring a release. There's maybe some issues that need fixing. You will triage what's going on. We're actually working on some stuff now to do with triaging issues, like what happens next. So that's cool. But we already speak to the big action that you'd sometimes take, which is deciding to kick off a hotfix. And so this brings us to another new feature that just shipped maybe last week. There has always been a bit of a special kind of flow for hotfixes in Runway with some shortcuts that get you on your way quicker. There's kind of a few special bits and pieces in terms of like how you kick off those releases. There's specifics with the sort of get set up, what you need to do, and then it might be a different streamlined flow compared to normal releases. And so there are different ways in Runway you can accommodate these different flows. The way you configure releases with the different checklist items and approvals flows, or more often than not, it's sort of a lighter weight process when it comes to that stuff. And there's also some shortcuts when it comes to actually just kicking off a hotfix. So this is the sort of manual action to create a release in Runway. For most teams, for regular releases, as you can see on the screen, we keep coming back to, you're often going to have just your next release staged automatically for you by Runway for like normal release to release cycles. But you can always manually draft releases in Runway. And you can manually draft, of course, hotfixes, which is like the common manual case. You might be slotting in a release in between, regular releases. You need to fix something. This is the manual action. A couple kind of automations that help you get on your way more quickly. At the top, Runway can immediately cut your hotfix branch from the right place. So it's a bit different than a regular release where you cut off of develop. Here, you would cut off the tag for your last release, the one you're hotfixing. So Runway can automate that for you if you'd like. Runway can also then automatically bump the version on that hotfix branch. Because that's the only place in code where you need to get the marketing version or the version name on the Android side. You need to get it bumped for the hotfix. So Runway can handle that for you. And here is the new bit that shipped last week. Once you've done that, you cut the branch, you bump the version. You need to get something into the diff, like you need to get the fix in for what you're shipping. And so now you can actually do that all in the same flow automatically and have Runway handle that as well. So in this case, basically, you're given the option of commits on develop since that last release tag. So anything that's new on the branch can show up here, and you can find in there the commit for the fix that was made. So in this case, this is supporting generally for hotfixes, the more common flow is applied to develop or main, and then cherry pick over. So this is kind of supporting that flow. You would select the commit from the fix that was made on develop, and you can select multiple commits. So if there was multiple pieces of work that need to go in, select multiple, and prepare the hotfix, and then Runway is going to do the rest. So in this case, we will cut your hotfix branch from the right place. We'll bump the version on that branch, and then we will immediately cherry pick over the fixes that need to be there. So when all of that happens, you should end up with a hotfix that's just about ready to submit. There's another automation that Runway can enable, which is sort of triggering your RC build on kickoff. So if you wanted to chain everything together, you could turn that on, and then you'd end up with everything you need, a build already cooking, and then you go from there. So it can be a really quick way to get hotfixes out the door. Cool. I'm going to pause very briefly for water and for any questions, and then we're going to change tacks a little bit. Cool. Continuing, we have added some new functionality in Slack. We, of course, have a bunch of Slack notifications that go out around all sorts of parts of the process. There's a lot here. The idea is to keep your team updated, even when you're not obviously here in Runway. Keep stakeholders and folks that are maybe further from the immediate mobile team, keep them updated. And so a lot of notifications, configurability to obviously turn stuff on and off, to mention folks either by role or by user. And you can send stuff to different channels and all that kind of thing. So notifications have always been obviously important. Something slightly more recent is Slack actions. So understanding again that like a good chunk of your team is going to be interacting with, they're going to be needed for this release process, but they are not necessarily always going to be in Runway. And so allowing folks to do stuff that needs to happen along the way in a lightweight way from wherever they are. So we create Slack actions to do stuff like, or slash commands, I guess there are different names for it. You can have QA sign off on builds in Slack. You can have kind of approvers or folks on the team that need to sign off or weigh in on something. They can add approvals or comments that will populate into Runway from Slack. And there's some new commands that are the ones we want to show that can give just the whole team a high level view of what's going on. So I'm going to share a different tab here. Pretty self-explanatory here. There's a Runway status action. And this is a shortcut to see where things stand for either your current release cycle or your live release or upcoming releases. And it looks a bit different depending which one. So if we just look at the basic one, it's going to show us the status of the currently active release, so the one you're working on. And you can see there's kind of this whole kind of flow here that aligns with the kind of release flow in Runway. You have some information about like dates and timing. If there were scheduled events like scheduled submission or scheduled release, you'd see that as well. And then you see the status on a sort of per step level. So again, if you're familiar with Runway, you know releases have this kind of workflow with different steps. And so giving you a high level view of where things stand, if there are blockers in certain areas. And of course, the links will take you right to where you need to go for details on any of these. So that's kind of the active release cycle, just a little snapshot. And then there is a view for live releases. If you just run that, you can see the currently live version, a bit of info about the build, when it was released. And then it's also going to surface all those health metrics that we were looking at. So you can see how this version is faring. If it was in the middle of a phased rollout, which this version is not, you would see the status of the rollout, what day you're on, that kind of stuff. So yeah, and you can also see like further ahead, so like further upcoming releases that are on deck as well, and just get a sense of like the target dates and that kind of thing. So trying to give you and more of your team just a quick glimpse of status versus again the kind of question asking that happens over and over. What's the current release? How's it doing? What's next release? All that kind of thing. So making it a bit more self-serve. Cool. Question on two questions here. Yeah, so the builds feature, build distro on Runway, that's coming up next, actually. So we'll take a look at that. Bulk editing notifications, not currently. This is something if you reach out to our team, we could probably help with, do some shortcuts on the back end to help out with. So yeah, just let us know. We can definitely work with folks on that. Awesome. So last big piece here of the new stuff is build distro. And for folks who aren't familiar, this is kind of an entirely new area of the platform that we launched pretty recently. It sits alongside, but is not necessarily coupled to the release management platform. So there are ways that the two things integrate actually, and I can kind of try to remember to show you what that looks like. But this can also be used in a standalone way. And the idea really is to give teams a better way to handle all of the pre-release distribution that they need to do. So making it easier to get different flavors of builds organized clearly, and then into the hands of the folks that that need those builds for testing and that kind of thing. So this is Build Distro. There is this high level sort of architecture called buckets. So something that was really important for us, looking at the other kind of tools that teams use for distribution, very often you're dealing with just like a long kind of inbox, a long list of distributed builds. And as teams get kind of more mature in how they do testing and how they do even development, like early distribution, getting designers, getting QA, getting other engineers' eyes on builds kind of earlier, even on feature builds or development builds. It's tough when your distribution tool has this big kind of list of builds and it's really hard to discern between the flavors. You might have an RC mixed in with this build that one of your engineers just spun up so that their PM could take a look at a piece of work. So the first really important thing for us was creating these really nicely defined buckets of builds. And these are going to be like different build flavors. So the things I just kind of said, eventually you're going to have RCs that you're preparing for the stores, and regression testing gets run on. You might have dev builds if you're running nightlies on your development branch, for example. These are the builds just before kind of you start preparing a release, where folks on the team will be grabbing builds to just see the overall latest state of work. There are personal buckets. So I actually didn't put anything in here, but you can have buckets for every engineer, everyone on your team, to drop in whatever builds they want if they need to share something, let's say. Then you can have sort of team specific or feature specific buckets. So this is getting into that more kind of mature flow where maybe you have different product teams around the org. They're doing a lot of work. They are creating builds that they want tested or they want to share with other teams. Having a grouping of builds that are sort of showcasing features, like even before they're merged into main. So these sort of feature builds, feature buckets is another style. You can see there's like a shared with me. Someone on the team actually explicitly shared a build with me for me to check out. So yeah, just some ideas, first of all, for the kind of flavors that you might be thinking about, and how that's kind of organized here in Runway. Going one step down, there is this sort of definition around buckets that allows them to be sort of automatically filled with the right builds, and you shouldn't need to really do much of anything at all. So we integrate with CI, you connect CI, and we do the rest. That should be really the only step. And so as you define these buckets, there are a few different ways to sort of characterize the buckets we were just talking about. So let's take a look at this RC bucket. I'm going to pull this up here. You already saw that string sort of at the top. There are what we call rules that define what build flavors are allowed in, or what build flavors actually Runway, pulls into a given bucket. So in this case, we have a branch rule, and the branch rule is defined by a couple things. One, it needs a workflow. So you're going to specify, again, from this CI integration, you're going to specify a particular workflow that builds this flavor of build. So in this case, it's a sort of App Store RC workflow. That's selected there. You can add arguments if you need to, any default build args. You need to specify a branch, but you can have tokens here. So in this case for RCs, these are builds that are being built on release branches, and our release branches look like that. So we just put in that pattern there. And those two things, basically side by side, workflow and branch, that's all Runway needs to know that defines this flavor of build, the RC flavor. There are some other options here. Let's actually take a look at another bucket just for context. Let's go actually next to the development bucket. This one is very similar to the release bucket. In this case, you have a branch rule. You have a particular workflow, different than the other one, of course, because you're building pre-RC. So you specify a workflow there, and you have a branch. In this case, it's a static branch. There's no pattern. It's just development. That's where our dev branch is. Pretty self-explanatory. And then again, Runway's pulling in that flavor of build over time. This one is an interesting one. This is sort of that model of like a feature bucket. Maybe it's for a particular feature team, for teams that have sort of folks working on different areas of the product. Um, this definition looks a bit different. Here we're using a pull request rule. Um, Depending on how your team works, this could be a branch rule. Maybe you have conventions where your, I don't know what it is, your payments team or each feature team is going to have something in their branch naming that identifies the team. If you did that, you could do a branch rule and have a pattern and that kind of thing. But more commonly, might be a pull request rule. And so basically, this is allowing you at a stage where someone on your team is opening up. They're kind of ready to um, prepare and have reviewed a piece of work. They're opening up a PR against some branch. Maybe it's against a feature branch, or it's just against development. In that case, you select the pull request rule. Again, we need a workflow. There's always kind of a workflow definition. We need to know what flavor is being built, how. Um, there's a base branch. So in this case, this is gonna look at any PRs that are open against the given branch. So again, here it's just development. This could be for if your team does long running feature branches. This could be a feature branch, and then the team that's working on that feature, is opening PRs against that branch. So you have a base branch, and then if you need to, there's additional filtering for users. And so in a case where, for example, you're doing this against development, chances are a lot of different teams are opening PRs against development. So if you want to make this team focused, you can filter by users. And so this is going to surface GitHub users in the org. And you can basically add in whatever folks are on this team. And then Runway is going to automatically surface and pull in only builds on these PRs against this branch from people on this team. So you get a really nice sort of organization that way. If needed, the last thing down here, again, you can filter specific artifact names. So if your workflows are building a bunch of different stuff, by default, we look at the file extension. So IPA or APK or AAB is a default there. Cool. A couple other cool things to call out here. So we've been looking at the organization, right? You create these buckets, different builds, different places. The next step is sort of like making it really easy for folks to understand what is in a build and to get that build onto their phone. So there are shortcuts for installing a QR here. You can share with yourself on Slack, so you can just open it up on your phone. People knowing what to test is the other kind of big issue. There are automations here. You can of course add and edit tester notes, but you can automate that based on the diff in the build. And so if you enable that, Runway is going to make sure on all these builds in any bucket, it's going to show information about what the build contains. Also, another sort of thing to make it easy to install, for buckets where there's a PR rule, Runway can actually automatically surface install links on the PR, right on the PR. So I think if we go here, we have a real PR here. Switch tabs, and it will look a little something like this. So this is a PR, someone on the team, someone on this feature team, ready to have some stuff looked at. Runway has hopped in here and added an install link, and same idea. This is going to be taking you straight to the build. If you open the QR on your phone, it can actually take you straight through and you install right from there. So that is a really nice one to make it easier to install. And last automation to call out here is build triggers. So especially as you get these different kind of buckets set up with different conditions, depending how often and how generous you are, I guess, using build minutes, you might want to be targeted about when you're actually triggering builds. And so if you enable this, Runway is going to handle the triggers for you based on all those conditions on the bucket. So it's going to trigger for only those users and PRs open against that branch. So you can get very targeted about when you're actually triggering builds, and we can handle that for you. I think that just about covers it, and this went super long, so I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to open the floor for any more questions, and I would encourage you all as well. If there are questions afterwards, if they come up, reach out. We're always super accessible. We love to talk to teams. So get in touch. Like I said, recording is going to go out afterwards. If you are a newcomer, new to Runway, in terms of getting started, 2 pathways. 1, reach out, set up a demo with us. We're happy to walk through one-on-one, talk about your specific use case, answer specific questions. The other option is self-serve. So we have self-serve sign up. You can go to the site, create an account, start getting set up. There is a pretty nice onboarding flow. It's going to sort of walk you through the most important integrations and settings and get you started. So you can definitely go that route. And we have a free forever plan. So if you want to get in there, you're not too sure how it's going to work for your team, get started there. And yeah, I think that's just about it. If there's no other questions, I will let you all go. Thanks so much again for joining. Definitely get in touch and look out for the recording afterwards. And have a good day.